Welcome everyone who's joining us. I see right now we are at 150 participants and counting. We're going to be starting in the next few minutes. We're just going to allow some time for more people to join us and then we'll kick off. I see more people are streaming in. Welcome. Really encourage you to introduce yourself. Let us know your name and where you're joining us from. My name is Sherry Gaki. I will be your moderator today, and I'm joining you from Nairobi, Kenya. Based in Nairobi, Kenya, but currently in Johannesburg. So welcome everyone. Also, tell us what organization you're from. Let us know what organization, where are you based, what are your names? I see so far we have 180 people. Welcome everyone. Okay, I see Joel from Durban, South Africa. I see Daniel from DRC, welcome. I see Ferdinand from Assen, the Netherlands, welcome. I see Delso from Mozambique. Welcome, everyone. We will start in the next 2 minutes. We're just giving a little bit of time for people to join in. I see Guy from Cameroon, Shabana from DRC, welcome. Stephanie Thompson from the UK. We have Frank from Tanzania. Welcome, everyone, welcome. Samuel Deche from Kenya. I see Sostin, I see you from Tanzania. Naledi from Pretoria. We just have a minute, just give us 1 minute to allow more people to come in and then we'll kickstart. Oh, I see Sandeep from Nepal. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for everyone who has joined us this evening or afternoon. Good evening or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. And really a big thank you for joining us today for this important conversation on colonial legacies and climate change, with a focus of how Indigenous and Global South voices are pushing back. My name is Sherry Gaki. I'm a communications and storytelling manager at Greenpeace Africa, and I'm delighted to be your host today. And this conversation that we'll be having today comes just a few days before the International Day of World's Indigenous People. And it's really going to serve as a powerful reminder of the need to amplify Indigenous and Global South perspectives in the fight for climate justice. And, we know that climate crisis is not just, it's something that's a big environmental issue right now. It's deeply tied to historical injustices. It's tied to systemic exploitation. It's tied to global inequities rooted in colonial legacies as well. So today we're going to be bringing together, incredible thinkers who are on the panel and also who are part of our participants, activists as well, and practitioners who are exploring how these legacies persist. And more importantly, how do we dismantle them so that we build a just, sustainable future. I will now invite Matias Ignacio Lara from the 50% organization to tell us a little bit more about the idea behind this webinar. Welcome, Matias.
Thank you very much, Sherry. Thank you everyone for being here today. It's an amazing attendance, and we have some wonderful speakers, so really looking forward to hear all of them, and I'm gonna try to be as short as possible so we can just hear them, who are the important ones to be heard today. Voices for Peace, it's a program that we started last year along with the Positive Peace Society, which is a group of students from Hiroshima University. We understood that peace can only be built if we work all along together. So we started to a partnership, and also a way to not just talk about peace, but start doing something along together. Also, during last year, I had the opportunity to meet the amazing Kathy May Carlson from the Climate Youth Resilience, and we also started working together in a partnership. And I told her about the idea of Voices for Peace, and she made a great effort and work in bringing along this group of organizations together, who are now doing this series of webinars, which this is the third one. We had one hosted in June that was about planetary peace, which is an approach that the Club of Rome is working. Just last month, we have one talking about polarization that was hosted by Roots, and now this is the third one. I would hate to leave any of the organizations outside of the remarks, but I don't want to take more time either. So thank you everyone for being here. This is just a first step into what I believe it's going to be a great partnership working around peace. So I would like to invite everyone in the audience also to be a part of this. Peace can only be truth if we are fighting for each other's existence and well-being. So this is just a word to speak for community building. Thank you very much. I'll give you back the floor, Sherry.
Thank you, Matthias, for taking us through the idea behind this webinar. And now I will move on to our amazing panelists. Joining us today is Professor Fumi Olonishakin, who is a Vice President of International Engagement at King's College London and founder of the African Leadership Center. Please say hello to us, Prof.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Hello, everyone. It's a great privilege to be on this panel. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Prof. Our next speaker is Igweshi Agustin, who's the Executive Director of the Center for Peace, Advocacy, and Sustainable Development in Nigeria. Agustin, you can maybe say a short word to us as you say hello.
Hi, everyone. Good evening here. So thank you all, and I welcome everyone, and I look forward to today's engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Samuel Bocham Bache, founder and executive director of Youth Advocates for Peace and Community Empowerment in Cameroon. Hello, Samuel. Maybe just say a short word to us as you say hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay,
yeah. So sending high five to everyone. And interestingly, the name is Bochum Samuel Bache, or it says Samuel Bache Bochum, depending on the order. So I've always loved Bochum Samuel Bache. If not, you say Samuel Bache Bochum. Okay. So thank you once more.
Thank you for that, Samuel Bache Bochum. Our next speaker from Greenpeace Africa is Kiza Hussein. Kiza?
Thank you, Shirley, for having me. It's an honor to join you all. Thank you.
Yes, Kiza is our Integrity and Justice Officer at Greenpeace Africa. We also have another colleague joining from Greenpeace Africa, who's a Global co-lead for a Fair Share project at Greenpeace Africa. His name is Amos Waimanya. Amos, please say a short word.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm pleased to be in this space. Looking forward to a great engagement.
Thank you, Amos. Last but not least, we have Sabina Sekai Tadarera, who's a grassroots peace activist and founder of Angel's Nest Southern Africa. Welcome, Sabina.
Hello, I hope you can hear me and you can see me. My network is a bit jumpy. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And so we'll jump right into our discussion for the day. And I will start with you, Professor Fumi. You've worked extensively on peace, development, and security in Africa. So how do colonial legacies continue to shape environmental conflicts and governance today?
Sherry, thank you. Just very briefly, because I know we have a short period of time. I think there are three ways I can see consistently and persistently how colonial legacies continue to shape this today. One, if you look historically, and just to take a slice of Africa, I'm sure for every region of the world, there are particular examples that we have. People behave differently from states. The states are artificial creations. So up till today, you see people crossing boundaries seamlessly. Porosity of borders is a natural part of human existence. But then state actors really limit how we work. And so that is something we've not yet found a solution to. I think Matthias talked about, was talking about just now, the question of the collective. And that's where actually, when you take the colonial legacy of the state as it's been constructed by colonial actors, people behave differently from states. That's the first thing I'm saying. The second thing is this collective organizing, where the moment, you work across borders, so physically and virtually, people work collectively. States tend to build individual successes more than collective successes. And that's a major issue. The third bit is ways of organizing. And the ways of organizing is why you have social movements always looking so different, whether you look at Eastern Europe and the ways in which we ended, where some of their own historical legacies were addressed, or you look at the African continent, or you look at Latin America, the social ways of organizing really reject a colonial logic that restricts us, to particular places. And I think technology is probably changing all of this anyway. And that's what needs to change is the restrictions of, the colonial logic. Final point is that if you look across Lake Chad region and look at the environmental issues, because people moved seamlessly before for ecological reasons, Lake Chad region, the Sahel, you could deal with that by the communal ways of organizing and moving across borders. By locking people within borders, you change their destiny in very severe ways. But thank you. Thanks.
Professor Fumi, I have just a follow-up question to what you've said, and I really just want us to set the foundation for this conversation.
Yes.
What does approaching peace building and climate justice through a decolonial lens really mean in practice? And why is it super urgent right now?
Thank you. Thank you so much. If we continue that logic, that decolonizing logic, the moment you look at peace and justice, especially when we look at, what the impact climate is making today, you realize that, again, because peace is framed through the logic of the outsider, of other powers, it does not enable the collective of the community. It shapes it in some kind of democratic logic. And that democratic logic, I'm not saying that democracies are not important. They are important, but it is what you vote for. What do you vote for? Are you voting for people or you're voting on issues? We rarely in our countries have referenda that are about the resources we spend on climate. But when it comes to peace and conflict, Every peace building, most peace building contexts in the world, you vote for leaders, even if they're the same leaders who have been coercing you all these years. You have elections for leaders, not elections for your common future. And if you therefore had elections, the real owners of peace, and allow the real owners of peace, which are the people on the ground, who really are the ones impacted by conflict in the first instance, if they collectively came together and voted about the terms on which they will live together, life changes. But that is not how even United Nations peacekeeping logic works. And that is one of the things we have to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. You've really set a strong foundation for our discussion today. Now, I want us to switch gears a little and just hear from someone who's working directly with young leaders. You've talked about voting. I mean, right now, Africa's population is made majority of youth, and our hands really are in the hands, our future really is in the hands of the youth. So I'll move to you, Augustine. Your work focuses on developing young leaders for peace building. How do you see the role of Africa's youth in dismantling colonial systems that perpetuates climate injustice? Augustine? Augustine, can you hear us?
Hello?
Can you hear us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, did you get my question? I can repeat it.
Sorry, yeah, no, yes, because sorry, it's raining here, so the network is not friendly. So maybe you can repeat the question.
Okay, no problem. My question was, as somebody whose work focuses on developing young leaders for peace building, how do you see the role of Africa's youth in dismantling colonial systems that perpetuate climate injustice?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. And first, I want to appreciate the organizers for this wonderful section. So young people of Africa, as the other speaker have said and everyone have said, young people constitute majority of African population, and the role of young people in climate change, peace building can never be overemphasized. So young people all over Africa are very innovating to address climate change issues. So as somebody working on youth development, peace building, we see efforts that our young people are pushing to ensure that, okay, peace is returned to their community, from initiative that address electoral violence, from initiative that address violent conflict in community. Young people across Africa are innovating, bringing different initiatives, participating in different programs across Africa to address issues of violent conflict. In climate change, you see young people negotiating in the global stage to decolonize issues that have been in Africa for a very long time. They are participating in different forums across. They are making their voices pushing for climate justice across Africa. In Nigeria, for example, a lot of a climate-friendly environment whereby every state in Nigeria, not just in Nigeria, but across Africa, have a national action plan that ensure that, okay, what we have now that will ensure that is one of the government priority when designing national programs. So across board, young people of Africa are participating, are making their voice heard, are innovating to ensure that peace and climate change, peace, insecurity issues, climate change issues are addressed, because peace and environment are also interconnected. When you look at these issues, you see that how young people of Africa have innovative ideas that are addressing them. Their participation in innovative approach to addressing them is part of broader approach of how young people are making their voice to be heard and addressing climate change issues across Africa.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Augustine. I'll move on to Samuel, because he's also somebody who's working with the youth and engaging with the youth on governance and peace building. And Samuel, I really want to understand from you, how do these efforts that we are making with the youth, how do they connect with environmental justice, especially in post-colonial Africa?
Okay, thank you once more. Interestingly, today we had a breakout session here in Windhoek in Namibia, where I'm currently engaging in a meeting with the Commonwealth. And so one of the aspects which we're focusing on, climate leadership. And so we're looking about those actions that member states, have to also engage with youth-led initiatives and different groups to advance climate implementation actions at local levels. And this should be worth noting that it's a collective effort, firstly. And interestingly, the United Nations, SDG, especially SDG 13, that about climate actions, and we have others, life underwater or in water, and there are a couple of them, So one of the things is that young people are so interested in taking their future into their hands, and this is through the initiative that they are carrying out today. Now, however, one of the major issues which I think we have to also get involved is the aspect of young people still believing and still expecting more to have resources for them to carry these actions locally from the Western world, which also is an aspect which we have to deconstruct, because with the colonial era, a lot of restrictions were being put in place. Is that, for example, we have aspects like the extractive aspect of within the Colonial as one of those landmark footprints which were being left, issue of extractions, and also the aspect of monoculture or monocropping. So these are some of those things. That's what sometimes Africa is a large plantation and so on, but then maintenance is not an issue right now. And the governance system too is that some of the leaders also who are being influenced by the colonial power still have this relationship that maintains some of the existing plantations, or maybe even this mining, against the current will and wish of the young people. So there's this aspect of conflict. I think I also want to bring in, yesterday we were watching a movie which is on the premiere here in Namibia called Skeleton Coast, which is a very amazing movie. Talk about mining-ish conflict and youth action in stopping that. So what I would say is that, first, young people are much aware about the environment today. And young people are now more than before engaging in diverse activities, tree planting, environmental cleanup, advocacy campaigns, and also engaging in policy conversations. Those are some actions. In terms of governance aspect, we have, for example, the climate justice movement, which was launched in Cameroon, the APSEC, which my organization is lucky to be part. We had to engage with the minister through the support of Greenpeace Africa. I think that was a great step, ensuring that the youth are also initiative working towards restoring, ensuring sustainability of the environment. They are aware and they want change, Then I want to shift a bit, before giving space for the next speaker. I would like to say that it's a deliberate action. We start from our immediate environment, being conscious that we cannot talk about sustainability. The colonial era has gone. However, influence exists, but then we need to also form what we call this trust building among ourselves as locals. When we have this bond, no matter what the government comes to do, when the force is strong as a community, and have a demand to the government that this is what we wish to do, I think it's going to help a great deal for us to counter this exploitation and all of these aspects.
Thank you for that, Samuel. And I just want us to go back to something, because you mentioned a couple of things that the youth are already doing. And I had a follow-up question on that, and I think maybe you can expound a little bit more on some strategies that you've seen working well, especially when it comes to mobilizing communities around both peace and climate issues without replicating colonial power dynamics? Are there strategies we've seen working really well? I'm sure we have a lot of young people in this conversation who would really want to learn from that.
Okay, so let me just like 2 minutes to talk about the strategy. The first thing I would say in terms of strategy is that young people are trying not to align, their desire in terms of achieving sustainability that cut across. Now, one of the things is that when youth come together, they have a stronger voice to demand, to advocate for change. That is one of the strategy. They are forming coalition now. A clean and clear example is the climate justice movement in Cameroon, which is not just by one person, but more than 20 or plus. So that's an action, which is very practical. Secondly, we also have the aspect of community service. Today in community, when you see youth going to do beach cleanup campaign, they don't go as an individual, they always put a call that they want to carry, and they form a team that do more in terms of that activity, and it give more visibility and inform and create awareness that the youth are not just complaining, but they are taking action. So those are just some two strategies which I can say. Sensitization is there, radio, newspaper, to name a few. So basically, I'll keep it at this level.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I want us to switch gears a little bit from the youth perspective and really look at how governance frameworks can either perpetuate or dismantle these legacies. And I want to move to Kiza. Kiza, as someone who is focused on justice and ethical leadership, how do colonial legacies show up in today's environmental governance systems?
Thank you. Thank you, Shirley, again. Well, as I discuss colonial legacies, I just also want to acknowledge that the language I'll be using definitely is attributed to colonialism, which is English. And to some extent, even the knowledge I will share, some of it, of course, comes from the colonial roots. As you may know, we're educated by mostly our colonial masters through the education system we have. So I would love to be an independent thinker and contributor, but unfortunately, I may not reach that level, considering that still what we're educated, we get it from the colonial masters in some ways. Having said that, definitely the colonial system is well entrenched in our governance systems. And I think we can even go back to from the colonial era when the colonial masters came to, let's say, Africa, how they influenced the current colonial system, or the governance system that we have today. Take an example. You well know that mostly countries have just been liberated, themselves through, Pan-Africanist movement, but also a decolonization movement where they have some of them have just got independence in the 90s. So that means we are still very new within the colonial journey. And also to say that most of the legal systems we have, pretty much most of it, maybe 90% or more, they are really structured around the colonial systems. If you talk about Commonwealth systems, civil law systems, all of these are really imported. They are not indigenous created. So let's look at how this has affected us today. I remember, growing up, I used to see our grandfathers really, live in harmony with nature. Whatever they wanted, they would just go in the back in their farm and collect everything from communal farms, from communal forest. And they would equally contribute how these forests were protected. But when colonial came in, of course, they were equally affected our grandfathers, most of these communal land systems were, let's say, designated as, let's say, national parks. That's an example of how land was literally, portioned to favor colonial masters. Then other, let's say, other lands or portions of land were either attributed for mining. Up to today, we can even look around our countries. Most of the land that is either rich with minerals, it's either owned by foreign organizations or companies, or it's in the hands of our governments, which we're also critical about whether they are transparent and accountable to us. So when we talk about, how do we really make sure that we bring governance into place now? I think we need to dismantle the system that Colonial brought in. That is the centralized, mostly top approach governance, where we entrust our leaders to be the custodians of our land, for example, of our resources. In most cases, they have not really represented our interest, and I can imagine many of you really have views about this. So if we can dismantle that system and we rather look at decentralized and also all-inclusive approach, where we empower our communities and our local tribes to have a say in how and where and when these let's say raw materials can be extracted, and to what extent, and how also this benefits these local communities. That could really go a long way. The other thing that we could say, it's about legislations. Like I said, the legal systems we have still are colonial oriented. So meaning that they don't really reflect our interest in many cases. Even if you go to the, say, ICJ, you go to the UN, you go to all these places, it's mostly shaped by colonial masters in one or the other. It's not to say, when I say colonial master, I'm not really using it as a derogatory, but that's a fact. And that's a reality we need to acknowledge. So until we have our own real legal system that is indigenous to us, for example, I think one of the example I could say that's in Rwanda, after the genocide of, that took place in 1993, there was a system called Gacaca system. That was an indigenous legal system that was created to answer and also address the injustice that had happened during genocide. So I would like to see many African countries also come up with innovations of their own legal system that addresses environmental injustices. That's what I can address for now. Thank you.
Wow, powerful words, Kiza. Very powerful words. I want us to just now hear from somebody who has actually been on the front lines with indigenous communities. Amos, you've worked closely with indigenous communities like the Maasai in Tanzania, Maasai in Kenya, who are pushing against carbon credit schemes. Why do these communities view such schemes as harmful in the first place?
Yeah, maybe just to pick where other speakers have left, and I do agree with the sentiments that all the speakers have expressed. Just to remind our audience that actually colonialism is still alive and kicking, especially in Africa. What we got as countries in Africa is the flag independence and maybe anthems. But colonial logic, colonial legacies are still controlling ways of lives in Africa. Speaking in the context of indigenous people and in connection to the climate crisis, we all know that indigenous communities are disproportionately suffering the impacts of climate change. But it does not just stop there. Some of the climate solutions that are being presented also are undermining the welfare, the well-being of these communities. We all know that with nature, using their traditional governance systems that are being undermined by what we are calling modernization. And this modernization agenda is being presented by the very people, the very groups, the very companies that have led these communities to suffer from this crisis that they have not contributed to. Today, if you look among communities in East Africa, especially the Maasais, they have been practicing pastoralism. And pastoralism has been a way of helping them to overcome the impacts that are presented by the climate crisis, and particularly droughts. They move around with animals, but the solutions that are being presented, for example, carbon offset schemes, are undermining pastoralism. Today, pastoralism is on the tactics that have been used previously by the colonialists are still being employed today. For example, some of the things that the colonialists see when they look at Africa, they look at this vast continent, empty land. And this is how they view indigenous territories that needs to be controlled. And how are they controlling them? They are creating boundaries. Prof talked about boundaries. These boundaries are meant to control the interaction, the movement of pastoralists, of indigenous pastoralists. And what is this causing? It is causing conflict between people and nature in these pastoral regions. It is causing conflict between traditional systems that have sustained these regions with what the proponents of this colonial logic are calling modernization. It is actually, Bochum mentioned something about information sharing. The thing is, what we need to actually seize right now is narrative control, because what the colonialists have done is to distort the stories. We are being told that traditional ways of life are not the best. We need to adopt these new ways of life. And by so doing, we are seeing a lot of conflict that is happening. And that's why we are in this situation of a climate crisis. Climate crisis is a result of governance failure.
Thank you for that, Amos. And just, I really want us to dive deeper into this conversation. And my question to you is, how then do we balance the need for global climate solutions with protecting indigenous sovereignty and land rights? You've talked about what the Maasai is experiencing right now. How do we create a balance between the need for global climate solutions with protecting indigenous sovereignty and land rights?
The collective, Prof talked about the collective. The thing is, the Maasais are known to share their land. And this is done through the mobility mechanisms that they have. With boundaries, actually, this is dividing them, creating more conflict. So if we are to really realize fit for purpose solutions that are going to help us address the climate crisis, is bring everyone together, honor and respect everyone's knowledge and practices. Why are we undermining traditional practices that these communities have held over time? Why can't we embrace both science and traditional practices that the communities have held? We are living in an era of disinformation, Trumpism, and all that have benefited from this system that has undermined the global majority are providing us with disinformation. It is time that we start creating our own narrative. We start telling our own stories, stories of triumphant, where communities have been able to overcome these challenges previously. And it is from that that we can build solutions that empower us, even in this phase of a crisis that we are facing in form of climate destruction. So let's empower communities to be able to tell their own stories, to be able to use our own tools. Tools exist amongst communities, and these tools are not being used. Instead, we are seeing imported solutions that do not actually involve communities. And that's why we are seeing a lot of conflicts. And we have had conflicts with the proponents of these colonial solutions, with communities standing up for their lands, standing up for their heritage.
Thank you for that, Amos, and for bringing in those very critical frontline insights. I want us to just look at a very different angle right now. We explore the gender dimension of these struggles. And I'm going to move on to Sabina, who is a peace builder and a gender advocate. Sabina, what are the specific challenges women are facing in climate-affected conflict zones?
Thank you so much. I don't know if I put my video, if you'll be able to, if I'll be able to continue much longer.
I think, Sabina, you can just switch off your video. You can switch off your video so that we hear you.
The question of women, can I, if you can. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you better now, Sabina.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you again for that. So women are at the forefront of each and everything that is happening in terms of climate change and conflict. I would like to zoom this to the women who are actually moving to South Africa from different African countries. And I want to zoom it and give examples of 3 specific countries. The DRC, a country with valuable resources, but with the armed groups with an interest of controlling minds. And violence has erupted in those spaces, which has moved or which has pushed women to coming to migrating and leaving their land. Also zooming into Mozambique at Cabo Delgado, where conflict has started as far back as 2017. And we've had hundreds and thousands of women and children being forced to flee and being displaced. Also zooming into Zimbabwe, into parts where they were hit by cyclones such as Idai, where people were forced to move from their homes in search of places to live. And all these women come in and they reach South Africa, and South Africa itself also has been hit by climate change. I give example of Durban, I give example of all other provinces where different impacts of climate change are being felt. And women and girls are at the forefront of everything that is happening. We have to fend for children. I mean, in all African families or all African homes, it is the responsibility of a mother to know what the kids are going to eat. And in that confusion, in that in conflict spaces and in spaces of climate change, it becomes difficult for women to thrive. It becomes difficult for children to thrive, and peace and security is really not guaranteed.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Sabina. And I'm just curious, maybe you can dive a little bit deeper into how patriarchy intersects with colonial legacies, and in what way is that preventing women from participating in climate and peace decision making?
Mm-hmm. All right. I think this is all interwoven, to be honest. The colonial legacy, migration, climate change. You really can't take one apart from the other. It's really interwoven in this context, and it's contributing to the conflict. And with women, I think this dates back from far back, where women have always been put in kitchens. Women have always been put in raising children and not really being taken seriously, and not really being given a space or enough voice to be able to come and present or to engage in where serious decisions or where serious discussions are taking place.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Sabina. I think you've raised some really interesting points, very, very much food for thought. So I want us to go back to Prof. And really, can we expound on how academia and policy spaces collaborate with grassroots movements to ensure local voices are central in solving global climate and security challenges? Prof?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
I wasn't.
there you are. Yeah.
I wasn't too clear. You were responding to me. I loved what all the speakers have been saying. The last couple of speakers are talking about the interconnectedness of several issues. We cannot, even what we call the colonial logic resides very much in us, in our different spaces. And I think the interconnections of gender, migration, governance, all of these things are very clear. We cannot look at the local spaces and look at how, we can at the front line shape policy without thinking about that logic, right? A couple of colleagues, earlier speakers talked about governance. that governance is absolutely paramount. So both colonialism and the post-colonial governance structures have banded together in different ways. Systems and structures and people who govern have ensured that the logic of, colonialism continues. Because if you're using the same colonial policy of the 50s and, maybe early 60s in some cases, to still govern and subjugate your community, something is wrong. And I also don't want us to I totally take the point about our indigenous systems. I do not want us to glamorize without being critical of the things in the indigenous systems that do not serve women well, that do not serve young people well. So you have the ageism, you have the gendered violence, the gender-based violence. We need to construct our own future, right? In which all of the voices of today's people, of young Africa begin to, and the young world, the young global space, begin to connect. And I think that's what Matthias was saying at the start, and all colleagues have, tried to talk about this. And therefore, I think two things have to be dismantled, right? The first thing to be dismantled has to be an existing governance structure that continues to replicate the power dynamics of before. And that's why I said if we're doing collective work, we should do collective work. And the second bit around that is the ideas that shape that collective work. So taking action at local level is very important, but we cannot upscale that action if we do not disrupt the ideas that make even our own government, our own leaders across all of the parts of the majority world do the things that they do, which can be quite exclusionary. Therefore, we need to change the policies around resources. And you can't change policies around resources without changing actually how we select leaders. So if we're going to deal with this question of the environment, we have to really collectively change the structure of leadership, the infrastructure of leadership, in order to ensure that environmental policies are really right there at the top and that the actions taken by young people can take over time. So we need to dismantle our own thinking in so many ways as well. We shouldn't glamorize one form or the other.
Thank you for that, Prof. We've heard from an academia perspective. I want to just move to Kiza. Kiza, from a governance perspective, what accountability measures are needed to dismantle exploitative systems? For example, like the carbon offsetting schemes that Amos talked about.
Well, thank you so much again, and I appreciate also, Prof, for that insight on the academic perspective and the rest of others. Well, I think the whole idea about carbon offsetting itself, which of course, you can literally see on the face of it. Well, from the face of it, you think it's a good thing because we're offsetting, but in reality, it's a neocolonial approach to still have control on our resources. Literally, they just come and pay you off, and then they can continue to omit and omit. While for you, they just say, okay, well, you plant trees for us while we continue to omit and omit. So we really need to open our eyes in when we are discussing this concept, because most of them are imported. We don't really allow our communities to come up with these grassroots solutions. Most of these, they just come and, either they tell us they find you, then you import these, and then they still look foreign and they have no logic in the real sense. Well, I'm not trashing it necessarily that all of it is bad, but we need to be critical and also be transparent when we are discussing these topics. On the idea of, let's say, well, carbon offsetting, it sounds good and it's a good thing, but companies also are using it, an organization, to continue omitting, and they're not really substantially reducing their emissions. So what should we do here? I think we need to have a no net increase. That means you can only omit what is really, really reasonable and acceptable, but you cannot emit what is beyond what you're offsetting. So if you have a no net increase principle, that means you're accountable. What you're offsetting is equivalent to what, for example, you're omitting. That way, then you can have that ability to account for that. But also we need to really strengthen our, I think, the auditing and also accountability mechanisms. understand this also takes us back to the legislative systems. Do we have independent instruments or independent bodies that can monitor and also hold accountable these organizations that are reporting that indeed they are offsetting their carbon, but in reality they are not? How do you hold them accountable? You know, they just report, for example, UNFCCC, yes, you have a mechanism to say report how countries are progressing, but you go on ground, it's really not substantial. It's not really there. People report that we've planted 1,000 trees, but you just go there, just planted like maybe 10 or something or 100. But even then, there's no sustainable way to monitor how these forests or trees are even preserved. Are they really going to grow up until they mature enough? Then we need to also ensure that there is prior and free informed consent when we are talking about, let's say, these communities where they are dispossessed. They are literally pushed away from their land for the sake of, let's say, carbon offsetting or even mining. So in this sense, in the indigenous people we're talking about here, they're protected because they wouldn't be dispossessed and pushed away without their free and informed consent. And that still also connects us to the governance. Do we have a credible and competent governance system that can say, okay, you cannot just do injustices to these people? And these, you know, more so they go into historical nature. They are well embedded in our legal systems because someone will say, oh, I have entrenched rights in this property, maybe I inherited it and inherited it, but you cannot hold them accountable based on that. Then one thing that I can talk about, I guess it's about the international system that we have. I understand here we're talking about Africa, but there's an interesting, I think, development recently with the ICJ where they give an advisory opinion to the countries that they can also be held accountable if they are found not to be really compliant with international instruments. It's a great thing. I think in this way, this is the best way we can say, okay, if countries are having poor laws that are not protecting, for example, forest and natural reserve, for example, we know we're talking about Congo Basin, we're talking about Amazon. If these countries are negligently actually conniving or even contributing toward these injustices, they should be held accountable. And even to some extent, they should even waive the veil to hold the leaders themselves accountable where they found that they are not necessarily putting the interest of people, their citizens at first. I think that's what I can say when it comes to how do we monitor carbon offsetting vis-a-vis preservation, but also sustainable practices that are really good for our environment. Thank you.
Brilliant response, Kiza. Thank you for that. Amos, what lessons can we learn from indigenous resistance movements that can inform Africa's broader climate justice agenda?
Yeah, the thing is, actually, first, Africa needs to set its own agenda. We have really played very well to the role of helping others achieve their own agendas. And I like the question that Prof puts on us around dismantling systems. First, we need to dismantle the system that divides us. The pastoralists have learned to work together, to live together in harmony with each other, but also with nature. So it is only by dismantling systems that are designed to divide us that we are able to achieve and find collective solutions. System that expropriates. One of the main criteria of colonial legacy is to expropriate and commodify. Some of the things that they do, they commodify nature for individual gain against collective gain. So we must be able to dismantle systems that expropriate for individual gain at the expense of the collective. Misinformation. We must come up with our own platforms, our own spaces, where we are able to debunk some of these false narratives, false information that is being put across. Today, if you look at most of African countries, we are in economic debt. Most countries are indebted. But the question we should be asking is, who owes who? Why are we not talking about social debt, issues of climate debt that is owed to our communities, and finding ways of us correcting a global economic system that is flawed, finding ways of enabling communities to be able to continue being custodians of their own resources, redistribution and maybe predistribution of resources from those that have accumulated at the expense of everyone else.
Thank you for that, Amos. Sabina, what role can grassroots women-led movements play in building a truly inclusive and decolonized climate justice movement?
Thank you. Within our own communities, we've already started, but the question that we are not able to get responses on is there an ear to listen to us? Is there somebody to be able to listen to our voices? We have created spaces and networks where women have been mobilized for like in our backyard initiatives, where we have small groups discussions, and we have created spaces where such issues that emerge are then discussed, and we try to come up with solutions that are fit for community level. We constantly are doing like our awareness raising and education and promoting discussions and engagements on climate change, peace and security, and colonial legacy discussions. But still, we have a question that says, is anybody listening to us? Is anybody hearing our voice? Because then we don't want to end up speaking to ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sabina. Now, I want to just hear from our experts, especially who've worked with the youth. Augustine, how can grassroots leadership drive long-term systemic change in climate governance? Augustine? Okay, I think I will direct the same question to Samuel. Samuel, how can grassroots leadership drive long-term systemic change in climate governance?
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, Samuel.
Yeah, so now you're taking Austin's question channel to me. Is that the initial plan?
You're both experts in that. You can definitely take the same question.
I know, right? So come again, please.
Yes, I was asking, how can grassroots leadership drive long-term systemic change in climate governance? Did you get me?
I think your network is a bit bad, so you want to try again, please?
Okay, let me just ask the question again. How can grassroots leadership drive long-term systemic change in climate governance?
Okay, now we're talking about grassroots movement. I think it has a great role to play in trying to ensure sustainability in systemic governance, in the sense that this grassroots movement is mostly owned by native individuals or indigenous people who are people from this environment. So they have this as a priority to conserve their environment. So what happened is that the ability or tendency to, to pass on the same virtue or values in true leadership to their children, their younger ones, or their relatives is one of that way of ensuring sustainability to confront, the government or other partners who have interest in their community, in their region, in terms of their own stance, per what they wish or desire to see happen in their community. So it's about the culture of protecting, conserving, and also having a say on what they wish. I think if this aspect of, trust, meeting this value, knowledge it will help that leadership ability for them to have their ground and ensure that, you know, they still have power when it concerns bargaining, because this is when we talk about the systemic aspect of governance. Because if they don't pass on the knowledge, the value, their next generation can come and they can equally be influenced by money and so on. And it happens today where a young person might be a chief and have friends who come to exploit because he does not have the value of that environment, and the person can go ahead and give it out and they exploit and the next generation suffer. So that's what I can say.
Thank you for that, Samuel. I see Piers also has a
Hello,
hand up.
can you hear me?
Yes, Augustine.
Oh, sorry, I was trying to turn on my my speaker before. I think I was having a network issue. Okay,
Yes, you can
for
add to
me,
that. You can add to Samuel's response.
yes. I think building community ownership for climate change, influencing policy from bottom up. I think also strengthen accountability mechanism and ensuring ensuring inclusion and equity. In the sense, what I mean is that I believe that real drivers of long-time systematic change in climate governance are not only in the high-level meetings, but also at the grassroots level. So uh, grassroots leadership also creates ownership of climate action. That is when people see leaders from their own community speaking about climate change, whether it is a farmer leading a tree planting initiative or a youth organizing clean energy project. All of this, becomes real and it becomes ours. Also, secondly, I can also say grassroots leaders bring the lived experience of people into policy spaces. That is, they translate struggles of community into concrete recommendations. That bottom up pressure is what forces government policymakers to pay attention. So in all of these, in fact, some of the strongest renewable energy policies in Africa today comes because youth and community voices refuse to be silent. So another point is accountability. Grassroots structures are often the first to notice when climate pledges are not being implemented. All of these, that is, they'll serve as watchdog, just like young people that serve as watch, ensuring that promises do not just stay on paper, but also translate into real change on ground. And let's not forget inclusion. So too often, women and indigenous people and rural community are often left out of climate governance. So, but when grassroots leaders rise, they also bring those marginalized voices into conversations that makes climate action not only strong, but also fairer. So, and finally, grassroots leadership is how we prepare the next generation, like next generation of young people, where young people see their local leaders taking action, they are inspired to follow. That is how we build continuity and ensure today's momentum becomes tomorrow's systematic change. So in short, grassroots leadership does not just contribute to climate governance. It is the foundation for lasting change because real change begins where people live, not only where policies are signed.
Thank you so much for that, Augustine. And that actually wraps our panel discussion session. And I just want to say a huge thank you to our panel who really shared very powerful insights. And now we'd really love to hear from the audience who have been sharing their questions in the chat. And the first question I'm going to direct to Professor Fumi, and it's from Matthias, who's asking that webinars like this mostly reach the middle class, not the majority of people who are most affected. How can we create real change if people we need to lead the movement aren't truly included? Meanwhile, the ruling class only speaks to the public in local languages when it suits them, usually to win elections. Professor Funmi?
I think that question is fantastic. And what I think, well, my position on this is that the middle class itself has often been culpable. When you've seen major transformations in societies across the world. You see it when the middle class has been really involved, working with the whole of society, right? The bottom-up question that Augustine was talking about then comes to life because the middle class has acted as a mediator of that space. And therefore, if we're having these webinars, if it's not being translated into community radios, if we ourselves are not actually working and collaborating at community level to help take the knowledge that is being built there and translate it into, great ideas for the kind of change we want to see into society. If we don't do that, then actually we're just talking amongst ourselves. I think somebody was talking about, echo chambers, and that's not what we want to be doing at the end of the day. We have immense influence to be able to work across, we're right in the middle. We can work across, below, and take ideas to decision-making levels. But it requires working together. It requires actually shifting our own influences too, and our own ideas and established ideas in fundamental ways. That's what I would say. I think that's a really important question. The middle class can actually be a maker or a breaker in this situation.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. And I hope, Matthias, your question has been adequately responded to. The next question, we have a question from Aisatu Jangana, who is asking Amos. Carbon markets are a good example of colonial legacies in governance, where Indigenous people can experience eviction from their ancestral lands when governments use their land for conservation projects. Considering the deep-rootedness of colonial legacies in intergovernmental organizations, is there a way that African states can find alternatives to carbon markets to harm their own people?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, and I will put it together with another question around what do we mean by dismantling. The thing is that currently we are having discussions around the transition, and everyone is talking about transition, others talking about just transition. But the reality is that we are not going actually to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of emancipation if we are continue working in piecemeal. We need a holistic approach, a systems approach to our solutions. So carbon markets, for example, promise governments few crumbs, and African governments fall for it without really looking at the whole system, how it's designed to continue undermining the sovereignty of African communities, African countries. So we are not going to address the climate crisis without also looking at the whole socio-economic system. So it is important that African governments, as they seek to find solutions to the impacts of the climate change that are ravaging our communities, they look at it from a holistic approach. We need to own our own livelihoods. We need to own our land. We need to continue owning our food systems. We need to invoke African values in the sense that the spirit of Ubuntu sharing is able to really direct our actions rather than individual gain that has led us to this problem. And how can we achieve this? Actually, we need to calculate the climate debt of fossil fuel industries, of billionaires, of capitalism, and find a cost that we can put to them and make them pay. There are currently other processes. As we speak today, states are meeting in New York to discuss new global tax rules. Such avenues provide us an opportunity for African governments to calculate the true cost of capitalism and be able to put them that have polluted to pay.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Amos. I have a question directed to Bochum here from Vishanti Supol. And the question is, what is our agency as Africans to resist and counter colonial legacies? What is Africa's complicity in reproducing Western hegemony and neoliberal practices that are central to environmental degradation.
Okay, so I think Africa needs to understand that maybe at the international level they have a say, and they should also have this consultation among themselves. When it concerns issue of the environment, climate, Africa have had their own fair share in terms of colonialism or colonial hegemony in the past. Now it's about, Africa, even though we have, like, for example, the AU, but then it's not very effective because each member state country has its own sovereign power to decide on how to govern its people and manage its resources. So it becomes challenging for all of them to have a unanimous view on how their resources could be, protected or exploited. So that's a major challenge we have within the continent when it concerns resource issues, because of there's this lack of a coordinating, body that have that enforcement, on what should be done. So it's a major challenge, which I would say as of now, uh, countries prioritize their need, their development agenda, and their partnership strategy, which sometimes it might be against the will of the local people. But however, that's just the major issue. So it's only when the member state government come together, it is going to be difficult. So I mean, all I would say is that member state countries within Africa should have a close consultation with local authorities in their communities where these resources are located or situated, on best ways to exploit, bring development, and also sustain. So, this is the only way to ensure sustainability and harmony among the people, to avoid conflict, violence, and so on and so forth. So that's my own contribution, I can say.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Samuel. Sabina, there's a question here for you from Alejandra, who's asking, what can we do as youth from the global south to fight colonialism with the goal of climate justice?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. Youth, just like women, just like all other groups, I think needs to be organized. That is the first thing that I can recommend. Need to be organized and need to understand the issue that we need to address. You see, also with experience working with the youth, one of the things that I've seen is we go to address a specific issue and we change on the way. We get excited. I mean, we're still young, we're still youth, we're still growing. So being consistent of the youth or of the issue and addressing the issue and not anything else that surrounds or that is not of interest to the issue. I think as youth, if you take that approach, you'll go far. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sabina. We also have a slightly similar question that's directed to Augustine. And Christian is asking, as a young African climate advocate, how can I best support Indigenous struggles without falling into tokenism or appropriation? Augustine? I think as Augustine, okay. Okay, yes, he's there. Did you get the question, Augustine?
No. Come again, please.
The question to you is, Christian is asking, as a young African climate advocate, how can I best support Indigenous struggles without falling into tokenism or appropriation?
Oh, okay. Thank you for the question. Yeah, as a young climate activist in Africa, yes, your support to Indigenous climate, your support to Indigenous people can never be overemphasized. What I mean is that you can continue to, make your voice to be heard, speak about climate change issues, support initiative volunteer with indigenous organizations, participate in community engagement event that has to do or address climate change issues, and they collaborate with indigenous people to address climate-related issues. Most importantly, try to build a network so that you, about the tokenization you talked about, appropriation, with the network you belong to, when you come together to do something, you will not feel that, you will not feel left alone. With collective effort, joining forces, volunteering with organization will help you escape through this process.
Thank you, Augustine. I also want Prof to chime into this question because I know she's written something very interesting on measuring peace. That's beholders versus owners of peace. And just to direct the same question to you, Prof, especially from a young person's perspective, they've asked a very crucial question. How do we support Indigenous struggles without falling into tokenism or appropriation?
Thank you. I actually thought it was an excellent question. We cannot change what we don't know. And if we're not authentically a part of something, we will work against it. If we don't know and we're ignorant, it's often said that there's no difference between the actions of an ignorant person or a wicked person. So the externals, the beholders of peace themselves may be quite ignorant about the environment, and therefore they treat people at the forefront of an issue, in this case of our environmental struggles, as people who receive token support and advice and all this continuous dependency on that, but they have no ownership of that issue. They don't even mean sometimes to have negative impact, but you then have harmful consequences because you don't know, but also you're not a part of it. Now, if we really have to work very hard to ensure that we're not more than 2 or 3 people removed from the front line. If we are, then somehow we ourselves are beholders of that peace, distant observer, of that peace, of the environmental struggle. We have to really identify authentically by working almost hand in glove with no more than 2 people, institutions removed from the front line, where the real owners of peace and of a better environment belong. The people who live through these situations on a daily basis, whether they're living through conflict, war, or massive environmental damage, and they're fleeing it, they're the real owners. Those who are far removed might be part owners of sort, but they're beholders because you can only observe distantly. So for us to be real owners of it, at least, or part owners of it, and co-own it, we need to work very closely and ask ourselves that question about our authenticity and why we do the work that we do. I think this is not an intellectual question, it's a question of the heart. All right? So maybe I'm preaching to the converted here, but that's the work that we have to do.
Thank you for that, Prof. And the final question from our Q&A segment is from Sven, and I'm going to direct this to Kiza, who is asking, how can we, Greenpeace, Africans, collaborate with other global South countries, for example, Greenpeace in Brazil, on international issues of climate change related to neocolonization?
Such a brilliant question. Thank you. Allow me to juxtapose a few things here. One is, how did we, Africa, achieve a level of independence through decolonization movement? Most of it was through allyship. Countries feeling that we are done, we've had enough of dominance and colonization, and we want to free ourselves and be liberated. So most of these struggles are really so huge that you pursuing these kind of movements alone, you may not achieve as much. But if you come together, definitely can achieve something big. And I think this in regards to climate action. Let's agree, at some point I remember when I was running project in Uganda where we're sensitizing youth about, climate change. It's way back in 2014-15 when we were discussing about the Paris Agreement. I remember one youth, I asked them to come together so that we can discuss about climate change. By then it was a really new concept. And they say, hey, I'm really struggling with my stomach empty and you're telling me about climate change, Western issues. How about I deal with something urgent right now? And that was the hunger and poverty and unemployment. And I could understand that. I could understand that that's how they think, and that's you think in a moment and you think in immediate solutions. But when we all got together and really start discuss deliberately and intentionally, then I can even go back to see what they're doing, and they're really doing amazing stuff. So I think hand in hand with global approach, I feel that with the threat that exists today regarding climate change, if Africa we pursue this movement alone, we shall not really dismantle or even really achieve much of the thing. But if we work with the global south, I hear talk about South America. You go to Brazil, you look at Amazon. You go to Peru, you go to Argentina. All these countries have huge interest in addressing climate change because they are equally affected by neocolonialism and colonialism legacies, and they want really to do something about it. And what I had when I was there is that we've had such a big bridge between ourselves. So we need to bridge that bridge by us, getting together, ideating, and concretely having solution toward this. And I think that's why COP 2030 that is coming in November is a great approach for us to let's get ourselves together, let's speak with one voice, and let's act without even waiting for the West. Let's act in this regard. So allyship, co-creation, collaboration, and unity, that's the way to go for Greenpeace Africa and the rest. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for wrapping it in such a powerful way, Kiza. And I just want to use this opportunity to thank our speakers, all our speakers, for such powerful and thought-provoking discussion. And thank you to also everyone who has joined us today. All the comments and inputs and insights you've shared in the chats have been brilliant. And as we continue to reflect on these conversations, I think one message is really standing out, that achieving climate justice requires dismantling colonial legacies and also centering the voices of those who are most impacted. That's the indigenous people, that's the women, that's the communities in the global south. For us, for the World Indigenous Peoples Day, we are dedicating this entire month of August to honor indigenous people and local communities as the true climate and biodiversity leaders they are, who they've protected forests for generations, they've defended life, they've restored ecosystems, despite all that they continue to face, the violence, the exploitation, and really the disrespect. So for those in Cameroon, Yaoundé, Cameroon, we have the Forest Cultural Show. This has been shared on the chat on August the 8th, starting at 8 a.m. If you're able to attend, please, we encourage you to attend. There's also the petition that has been shared in the link. Please take time to sign it and be in solidarity with the communities that we are continuing to support. And also, this is not the end of the conversation. We encourage you to stay engaged, share what you've learned, and really continue to push for decolonized approaches to peace and environmental governance. From us here at Greenpeace Africa and our partners, that's Matthias is here from the 50 organization. We want to say a big thank you for being a part of this important dialogue and to wish you a great evening. I've enjoyed being your host, Sherry Gaki, and I hope you've enjoyed the conversation that we've had. And let this not be the end of it. Have a good evening and a happy Indigenous month to all of us.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.